David, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Tara. It's fun to do this.
Ooh, okay. So my first question is, are you more traditional or more kinky?
Boy, it depends on the context. I like spicy food. Um, I as we go into the bedroom, I like kinky with a traditional overtone.
Ooh, tell me more. What would that entail? Like kinky sex with traditional overtone.
Well, I need to have a connection with a person. I
Right.
need to, I need trust and safety and communication. It's funny. I used to think I was into kind of the idea of casual sex or just kind of less committed interactions, and then I
Mm-hmm.
found that yeah, in those situations, my penis didn't want to perform. My penis was kind of like, I don't know this person. And so I had to learn to listen to my body and what it was telling me. And what it was telling me was that, safety, emotional connection, intimacy, and trust are just really important for sexuality for me.
Yeah. You know, when people say they are demisexual, can you talk a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I tend to be a little critical of the idea of demisexual.
Mm-hmm.
Demisexual is, people who say that they can only get sexually aroused with people that they're in love with.
Mm-hmm.
While you might describe me based on my self description just a minute ago as a demisexual, I certainly don't identify that way.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've heard that, term mostly from young women. And the interesting thing for me, I think, is that they oftentimes use that concept as a way to push back against pressure to have casual sex, and I think that's brilliant. Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very useful adaptive strategy. I do think it's regrettable that people, are putting out this social expectation that you should have casual sex or that you
Mm-hmm.
should be able to get turned on. One of the things I've learned over 20 years of doing this now is just that sexuality and sexual arousal is so individualized that
Mm-hmm.
I worry sometimes that we can identify ourselves to death,
Mm-hmm.
with the notion that ultimately almost every individual person has some unique identity that describes them. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I just kind of say we're all human in really complicated different ways.
Okay. So for my listeners that don't know what a demisexual is, can you tell us in two sentences?
Oh, I mean the people who it's an offshoot of asexuality. It's an identity for people that are saying they can only get sexually aroused with somebody that they have an emotional love relationship with.
Okay. All right. So we are just finishing up our cuckolding month, and we had a few people on the show talking about cuckolding and different views. You wrote the book on cuckolding. Am I right?
Yeah, insatiable wives, women who stray, and the men who love them.
Tell us more about Insatiable Wives, and are you for or against cuckolding and why?
So it's a book that I wrote back in 2009. It was just republished as an audio book last year. It is a wonderful listen. And I ended up writing the book because initially, when I first encountered the idea of cuckolding, I thought it sounded crazy. I thought it sounded unhealthy. I thought it sounded like a problematic kind of form of relationship or behavior. But the people that I met who were into cuckolding and hot wifing were remarkably healthy. And as a clinician, it forced me to realize that I had allowed, bias around female sexuality, around non-monogamy, around promiscuity, whatever that is, to intrude into my clinical thinking. Because as a psychologist, I'd never been trained about, non-monogamy. I'd never been trained about, female sexuality, frankly, or female infidelity, or any of those issues. And I realized that morality was behind my reaction. And so I once I realized that, once I realized how my knee-jerk reaction was to pathologize, I set out to wonder and explore why, and to explore what is going on here with cuckolding. Why are people into this? Is this a new thing, or is this an old thing? Is this, healthy or not? Ultimately, at the end of the day, I published Insatiable Wives and really explored all the biology and the psychology and the evolutionary history of this. And I argued that people who are pathologizing it typically are doing so based on antiquated and somewhat biased views around monogamy and heterosexuality, and particularly female sexuality, that control of female sexuality and treating females as property is really kind of behind this fear of cuckolding. In general, I believe that when healthy people engage in cuckolding, it can be a healthy behavior for them. I do see some people where cuckolding is not a productive or a positive behavior for them to engage in, but that's because they are not particularly healthy or well put together people or couples. So it's not the cuckolding is the problem, it's the person.
Wow, that's so well put. And that actually is very similar to what swingers told me, is that swinging is not going to fix a shitty relationship. Same with cuckolding, or trying it out is not going to fix a shitty relationship. When you're unhealthy, when you're in an unhealthy relationship, like that's the problem, not what you're trying to do sexually normally.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I think that the interesting thing about cuckolding is, particularly as I've been kind of watching it over the past, 10 or 15
Oh,
years.
you've been watching it?
Yeah, well, I got to watch something, right? I mean, watching the Jerry Falwell Jr. documentary on it. As it has really kind of evolved and changed. When I wrote the book, nobody was talking about cuckolding. It was
No
a
one.
very shameful, underground, behind closed doors kind of behavior. And in fact, I talked to a lot of people who got shamed by swingers and by polyamorous folk for engaging in cuckolding, because that dynamic didn't meet either of their kind of expectations. But over the past 10 years, cuckolding has just really exploded into kind of mainstream dialogue. And now a lot more people are talking about it and exploring it. What was interesting when I started exploring it was that it was overwhelmingly a male fantasy. It was overwhelmingly introduced into couples by the husband. But now we've started hearing about women approaching their husbands and saying, hey, what do you think about this? I think I'd be into it. And that is new, but it's also a remarkable demonstration, I think, of the change in female sexuality, in egalitarianism, in the ability of women to express their sexual interest in a non-normative way and not be shamed, excluded, rejected for it.
It's interesting. I actually have lesbian clients who practice it as well.
Yeah, which is new, and yeah, I think you talked to Justin. Justin and Dan Savage and I did a study a few years ago about gay cuckolding in gay men, and again, all of these new offshoots of it are just really, really kind of fascinating to consider. We're also now starting to hear about, cuck queening, which is women that are into their husband, being with other women, and much less common than heterosexual cuckolding. But again, we're starting to see all these new explorations. I just think it's wicked cool.
I agree. I think it's exciting. I'm gonna admit, like, I fantasize about that sometimes. So maybe one of these days in the future, I'm gonna make that come true, is me watching.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. now I do think that that voyeuristic, kind of component is maybe something new. I don't know if it might be related to people, watching porn. I think as
Mm-hmm.
watching porn has become more acceptable and more people are learning about what turns them on
Mm-hmm.
while watching porn, I think it is possible that more
Mm-hmm.
people are becoming a little more accepting or gravitating towards a voyeuristic exploration. And so that's where, having your partner be your personal porn star can be really exciting and sexy. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, though? And some people are out there saying, "Oh, see, look, that's destroying sexuality.
Right. Yeah.
People are just becoming voyeurs." Well, I think they've always been voyeurs, and these changes are simply leading to people being more willing to express some of these interests or desires. I, I get frustrated with people, and there's a lot of them online
Yeah.
that, are constantly talking about, oh, this new sexual behavior, this new sexual fantasy, this new porn, this new app is going to destroy human sexuality. And it hasn't ever happened. I mean, you go back hundreds of years and there's all these moral panics over,
Mm-hmm.
this thing or that thing. I mean, even teddy bears were believed that having little girls have teddy bears instead of dolls. There was this panic in the late 1800s that the little girls were going to grow up and not want to be moms, because
Wow.
they didn't grow up with dolls, which teach them how to be a mom, right? So there's always this panic. And the thing is that human sexuality is so goddamn resilient. I mean, if it wasn't as resilient as it is, we wouldn't be here. If human sexuality and human sexual desire was so fragile as everybody seems to believe and panic about, the human race wouldn't exist. So I really think all these people that panic about sexuality just need to chill.
Period. I support that message. I just got goosebumps for what you said. That was so well put. A little bit ago you talked about porn and you wrote a very interesting book on porn. What is it called?
Ethical Porn for Dicks: A Man's Guide to Responsible Viewing Pleasure. And I got to tell you, the title was controversial, and I've had Mormon men write me and say,
Ooh.
I can't carry your book around because I know, because people are going to get upset and with the word dick and porn. But I was just so happy to be able to get the words responsible and pleasure in there,
Yeah.
because we don't talk about those things enough. And that was the point of that book, was that, it's kind of a funny story. I mean, clinically, I see a lot of men that were struggling with porn. I see a lot of men that were getting in trouble with porn use in their marriage or at
Mm-hmm.
work. And I wanted to be able to write something for them that talked about healthy and responsible ways to use porn, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to the abstinence model that is out there. Overwhelmingly, the research indicates that adopting an abstinence model when it comes to pornography increases distress, increases
Mm.
shame and guilt, and makes the problem worse. So I
Mm.
wanted something that was going to be more accessible. But the problem is guys don't read, generally. And, and then I found that when I was talking about pornography, I talked a lot about the research around it. I talked a lot about the science. And one time I was on Katie Couric's talk show, when she had a
Mm-hmm.
talk show, and she got really upset with me as I challenged some of her beliefs and kind of morally
Mm.
based ideas about pornography. And I realized then that I needed to be able to talk about pornography in a more accessible way. And so I
Mm-hmm.
went back and I rewrote the book as though I was sitting and having a beer with a guy talking about their porn use. And
Mm-hmm.
I pulled out the clinical language, I pulled out the science, and I said, "Hey, let's just come down to earth and talk about this stuff." And and it worked, and I've had lots of men write me about how accessible they found it, but I've also really coolly had lots of women write me and say, reading this helped me understand why my husband or boyfriend is watching porn, and now I'm not so scared of it.
Wow, that's powerful. Now I have to probe. So your position is that porn isn't the problem, it's how you use it.
Overwhelmingly, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the uh so I'm going to go back on my word now, right? I'm going to talk about the research.
Yeah.
And the research indicates that, people who have problems use porn in problematic ways. And so, particularly when it comes to men, we see men that have serious anxiety problems and
Mhm.
depression problems and
Mhm.
negative emotion problems. They oftentimes use porn in unhealthy ways because
Mhm.
they are using masturbation to porn as one of the most powerful, effective ways that they have to manage their negative
Mm.
emotions. When we're turned on, those negative emotions go away for a little while.
Mm.
And porn and masturbation is a very effective way to do it. However, what I tell those guys is, if you get stressed out at your kid's PTA conference, whipping out your phone and looking at porn is not going to be a very effective strategy. So what else you
Mhm.
got? So with those guys, I never tell them to stop watching porn, because when we tell people not to do something, we paradoxically oftentimes increase the salience of it. There's this great research by Yaniv Efrati in Israel, who found that the more people try to not think about masturbation, the more they think about it. Right?
Pink elephant.
Don't think about that naked pink elephant, and if you do, you're a dirty pervert, right? And should be ashamed of yourself. So instead of trying to stop the porn use, because the porn use is just a symptom of a problem, instead
Mm.
of trying to stop the porn use, we try to identify what the porn is doing and identify, are there other strategies that can achieve that same function.
Mhm.
The other group, interestingly, that struggle with porn are people who are ashamed of their porn use. And, there's an internet myth that watching too much porn causes erectile dysfunction when you go to be
Mhm.
with a partner.
Mhm.
And there's the science is all against that. What is clear is that there's one group of men that do experience erectile dysfunction when they go to be with a partner related to their porn use. And
Mhm.
it is men who are ashamed of watching porn. So the more
Wow.
shame and moral conflict they have, typically because they were raised religious, and then they go to be with their partner and they're feeling guilty and ashamed over having jerked off to porn. And now that shame and guilt gets in the way of sexual function. But
Um,
again, the porn is just a symptom of this unresolved moral conflict about their sexual desires. They have sexual desires, whether it's masturbation or fantasy or whatever, that they were taught made them a bad person. And so when they
mhm.
engage in this behavior, now they think they're a bad person. And then when they go to be with their partner, they think, well, she shouldn't be with a bad person, right? I'm a bad person. I don't deserve to be with this person. And
Mhm.
that gets in the way. So unfortunately, and I see lots and lots of people that come to me talking about struggling with porn, and I always want to get behind the curtain and let's
Mhm.
talk about what's going on behind the story, because porn is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's
Mhm.
figure out all of the things that are contributing to this. And porn is typically what I call a sexy, shiny object, that we
Mm.
get distracted by that,
Yeah.
and we don't talk about the person. I want to talk about the person.
Mm. Wow. One question came to mind for me when you were explaining that is, well, is there a difference between the type of porn they watch? Like if you watch amateur porn versus like violent gangbang, like on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, it's a nuanced question. So I do ask people what kind of porn you watch, and most clinicians don't. I think it's important because typically the kind of porn they watch tells us something about some of their sexual desires that are often unmet in their personal sexual life. So oftentimes they're watching porn that is a fantasy that they have that doesn't exist in real life. So that helps me again start to understand them as a person, and what they are looking for. The I see people who are struggling with moral conflict over porn because they worry about, are the performers being taken advantage of? Is this consensual? And that's where I, really happily get to introduce them to the idea of ethical porn, with performers, whether it's Pink and White Productions or Afterglow. There are these groups out there now, largely women led, that are making ethical porn where the performers are all consenting, not being exploited. They're engaging in behaviors that they want to engage in. And it's like fair trade coffee. You don't have to feel guilty about watching this because nothing bad happened here.
Right. Everyone's happy to be here.
That's right. And now some of the porn, even ethical porn, can be hardcore. And then we get into the question of, are there sexual desires or fantasies that are unhealthy that people shouldn't pursue? And Christian Joyal is a Canadian researcher who's really looked at this and found that people who have fantasies of non-consensual behavior, unhealthy sexual behaviors, are the least likely to try to engage those behaviors in real life. It does not appear, in fact, that watching unhealthy porn contributes to you engaging in unhealthy sexual behaviors, unless you're already an unhealthy person. And so that men that are antisocial, men that have misogyny, men that have low empathy, if they watch unhealthy, exploitive, non-consensual porn, it increases their chances of engaging in unhealthy sexual behaviors. But women preferentially watch rough sex or violent porn more than men do. Women search out rough sex and violent porn more than men do. Now, proportionately, more men watch that material than women because more men watch porn.
Yeah.
But when we look relative, and you can, I'm sure you can teach me more about the statistics than
by ratio.
Else. Exactly. Yeah. We see that for some reason, women are more attracted to rough sex and violent sex, simulated rape fantasy than men are. But women, women are the least likely to kind of engage in unhealthy sexual behaviors related to their porn watching. So again, we have to be very, very careful about attempting to separate the porn or the sex fantasy from the person.
Right.
There's a lovely book called Who's Been Sleeping in Your Head by Brett Carr. He's a British psychotherapist, and he looks at like 20 or 30,000 sexual fantasies. And at the end of the day, he says, I can't see that there's any such thing as an unhealthy fantasy. That sexual fantasy, and that's all porn is. Porn is sexual fantasy made external. There's no such thing as an unhealthy sexual fantasy. Sexual fantasies are the ways that we work through our questions and dilemmas around sex. There are unhealthy people, and those unhealthy people need help. Sexuality is typically just a symptom of some of the unhealth that they're struggling with.
Wow, preach. I have to ask you, do you watch porn?
I do. Yeah, I have. In my book, and I really struggle with that, in ethical porn predicts. I mean, again, I'm a clinical psychologist. Actually, I was doing a training the other day talking about, how, many of us were trained in the day that you never reveal anything about yourself. Well, I'm writing a book about, responsible use of porn. And I'm thinking, well, God, I really, if I don't talk about my personal relationship with porn, what a goddamn hypocrite I am. And so And so I talked about, the first exposure I had to porn, probably I think I was in fifth grade or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I mean, I prefer amateur porn. I
Mm-hmm.
prefer porn with older, more natural kind of women.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the thing that really turns me on the most is vintage porn from like the 1920s, because I don't know,
Whoa.
there's this kooky thing that happens in my head where I just think about those performers as in nursing homes, 90 years old, and they're giggling thinking about the hot sex they had on camera 90 years ago. That tickles me to death.
Oh my God. That's so funny to think about. And I love that though, humanizing old people. Cause I feel
Yeah,
like we don't think about, when you think like having sex, like you don't think about old people.
that's right. And
So that's
I
kind of
mean,
cool.
yeah, and God help me when I'm an old person in one of those homes. I want to have the ability to still be sexy, right?
Oh yeah. I
So
want to
so
have like an
yeah,
old person gangbang.
yeah.
Okay, so you've been talking teasing us about responsible porn viewing, right? So
Yeah.
I guess my question now is, so what's the best way to use porn?
Um, yeah, so that's a good question, Tara. I'm not sure I've ever been asked that. I think the best way to use porn is to use it mindfully. I talk to people that they need to turn off the autopilot. They need to, if they're going to watch porn, they need to think about when they're watching it and where they're watching it. They need to think about their relation to porn when they are not turned on. And this sounds silly, but when we're turned on, our disgust sense goes down. Some of our impulse control goes down. Our sense of time
Mhm.
passing.
We're just monkeys.
That's right. And so in order to use porn mindfully and consciously, we need to think about how we feel about our porn use when we're not turned on. So I encourage people to spend some time and ask yourself, you know, how do I feel about the porn I watch?
Mhm.
Do I think the porn I watch is okay, or do I feel guilty or ashamed about it? Um, and if I do, why? What
Mhm.
circling back with the cuckold fantasy, I the cuckold fantasy is more popular in more conservative men
Mhm.
who have been raised with very stereotypical, rigid rules around masculinity. And what's fascinating is, on a weekly basis, I get these emails and calls and notes from men who are, prominent Republicans, men who are in skinhead Nazi groups, men who are in QAnon, men who are in the Proud
Damn.
Boys. And that's their fantasy, but they can't tell other guys that around them because they're ashamed of it. So
Mhm.
I want to help people explore their fantasies and desires and integrate them into their self-image in a healthy way.
Mm.
Porn, we can learn about our sexual desires, our interest from thinking about our porn use. So
Mhm.
I'll ask guys, for instance, is there a certain performer that you like? What do
Mhm.
you like about her? And I'll hear things like, well, she seems to really enjoy sex. She
Mhm.
seems really unrestrained. She seems really passionate. Sex
Mhm.
looks fun for her.
Mhm.
And then I say, so have you ever dated a woman like that? Because it sounds like that's what you're really wanting and looking for. And
Mm.
that, again, is one of the things that we can learn about ourselves from
Mhm.
thinking about our porn use. Um, can you watch porn too much or too little? Maybe. I mean, it fluctuates. And again, remember when we talk about porn, we're actually talking about masturbation.
Right.
Porn is always accompanied by masturbation, and
Mhm.
porn is a tool to increase arousal during masturbation.
Mhm.
So I also want to talk to people about how they feel about masturbation, what they think
Mhm.
about it. Do they think it is healthy or not? Do they have any, concerns that it makes them a bad person or less of a man? And think about these things in the light of day and question, are they true? And
Mm.
now I want people to now go forth making conscious adult decisions mindfully
Mhm.
about what kind of sexual being they want to be. I
Mm.
ask everybody I work with, who's your sexual role model? You know,
Mhm.
who do you think about when you think about that's the kind of sexual being I would like to be?
Mhm.
And, when I think about it, I think about, like, it's silly. I think about Miley Cyrus.
Uh-huh.
Miley Cyrus, suppressed, or, as a sexual being, growing up in Disney and everything else. And then she embraces her sexuality. And a few years ago, people tried to blackmail her with nude photos that they were going to release online, if she
Uh-huh.
didn't, like, I think, pay them money or something. And she basically said, fuck you. And she released the pictures herself.
Mhm.
I think that that is just so punk rock and badass, but it
Uh-huh.
is, it is this self-acceptance of
Yeah.
her sexuality that I think is incredible. And that's the kind of modeling I want people to have.
Mhm.
Because what we see, what I see in my office every day, what we see in research around the world, is that it is shame about sexuality that
Uh-huh.
causes the problems.
Mm.
So anything that we can do, and your show and the
Mhm.
work that you do does this, anything we can do to relieve some of that shame, to call out some of this sexual shame, to free people from it, helps them to be healthier sexual beings and helps all of us to live in a healthier sexual society.
Mm. Wow, what a beautiful ending to this interview. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your research, your wisdom, your examples. I find it really inspiring to think about, like, who is your sexual role model? And, as like a woman in her 30s who loves talking about her sexuality, who's main goal in life is to spread sex positivity. I hope that for um younger women and girls that they could look up to me and feel inspired to explore their sexuality, because I did it way later. Like, I did it when I was almost 30 to explore my
Wow.
sexuality and accept that self-acceptance that you talked about. It took me a long time. I
I
was
got to say, you are rocking it right now, though.
Thank you so much. I went through quite a lot of self-discovery. I was married before. It wasn't the right marriage for me, and it was very difficult getting out of it. So a lot of growing, like, just as a human. I stumbled upon sexual awakening journey, and I've been on that journey. I am on that journey right now. So with conversations like this, it makes me feel very hopeful about the future, because I think there are people that care a lot about this cause, sex positivity and helping people. So thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, again, the work you're doing is important. I think you are a role model for lots of people out there, young women and men who want a partner like you.
Thank you. Well, the last segment of my show is called Five Quickies with Dr. Tara, but I have a
Okay.
loop.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, you got to lube me up.
Well, okay. Five quickies, like kind of a rapid round.
All right.
All right. Number one, what to do when you lose interest in your partner?
Talk to them. Start doing things with them. I see this a lot, and oftentimes the partners aren't doing things together, particularly exciting things. So I encourage those folks to first identify, hey, something is kind of going on. There's some spark that's kind of gotten lost. Let's start getting out and exploring the world together. Now, I'm not talking about going out and necessarily exploring non-monogamy or sex with other people, or even sex in public or going to swingers clubs or anything like that. But going skydiving together, going on adventures together, going horseback riding together, doing things that you don't normally do together helps people to inject some novelty back
Mm-hmm.
into their relationship and life and can learn new things about each other.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Number two, what are your thoughts on squirting?
Yeah, I think it's just such a kind of hysterical and sort of sad controversy
Uh-huh.
about whether it's urine or not. I mean, I just think it is fucking ridiculous. I think it is misogynistic as hell that anybody cares.
Mm-hmm. Why do
Um,
you think it's misogynistic? Can you explain that?
because it is shaming female sexuality. It's making female sexual pleasure somehow gross, or
Mm.
associated with with
Like
human
saying
waste.
that it's pissed.
That's right,
Ah.
exactly. And and then I mean, you even see this that recently there's been several attempts to regulate and ban porn that
Mhm.
involves female ejaculation under the premise that it is urine, and they're already banning water sports
Mm.
porn.
Mm.
So again, I just think I think that there's political motives behind some of those arguments that we're not talking about.
Period. I love squirting, so I'm a fan. Number three, what to do with whiskey dick?
Learn to use your tongue, your fingers, your toes, your knees, your and I see this. I see this with lots of guys who come in and they're like, I got so anxious with my partner that I couldn't get turned on. And it's like, oh, okay, well, great. Welcome to the wonderful world of sex that doesn't revolve around your penis,
Mm-hmm.
and ask your partner, hey, my penis isn't ready to play, but what else can I do that would give you pleasure? And your
Yeah.
partner is going to go, fucking A.
10 things you can do right now.
That's right.
Period. Number four, thoughts on butt plugs for men.
Yeah, so Dan Savage went out of town one time and I covered his column, and one of the first questions I got was on inflation fetish and guys
Ooh.
using these inflatable butt plugs, which end up kind of being risky and dangerous.
Oh.
So I think that the when it comes to any kind of anal toys, it's got to be well made, it's got to be safe. Of course, it's got to have that flared base. Um, I think that the more men can explore
Mm-hmm.
non-dick centric sexuality and
Mm-hmm.
eroticism, the
Mm-hmm.
better. And as my friend Joe Court says, your anus doesn't have an orientation. So exploring a butt plug doesn't make you gay, it doesn't make you
Right.
bi, it just helps you connect to your body.
Yes. Yeah, like it's so interesting how much that's connected to sexual orientation in our
Mm-hmm.
culture when in fact it's just a neutral thing. Like your butthole is a neutral thing.
That's
It
right.
just exists. All right. Well, the last one is kind of related to that. So, number five, have you or would you try pegging?
Have tried it, and
Thoughts?
thoughts. Um, changes your perspective on sex. I think, frankly, I think every woman should do it and learn how much work some of this stuff can be, and I think every guy should do it, honestly, to experience sexuality from those perspectives. They don't have to love it, they don't have to do it all the time, but I think it is just like every surgeon should at some point be on the table
Mm-hmm. Oh,
getting an operation. I think every guy that wants to put their penis in somebody else should learn what it's like to have that from the other direction.
I love that. What a great ending to this episode. I'll make sure to have your links in today's show notes so that my audience can go follow you and learn more about your books. I highly recommend Dr. David Lay's books. So I'll make sure to have links in today's show notes. Thank you so much, David.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good show.
And and my Love Bites fam. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share. If you love this episode, tag me in it. I love getting all those tags. And per usual, have an orgasmic day.
Thanks for listening. This was Love Bites. Love Bites. By Dr. Tara. Follow Dr. Tara on social media at lovebites.co. Have an orgasmic day.